This is episode 4 of Gaming at the Round Table. Welcome back. Brought to you by Owl Knights Media. My name is Maverick. I'm here with Jojo and Crystal, and we're gonna get into a topic we didn't get to into our last podcast, and we had planned to. So, peer pressure in the industry, and is it healthy for the gaming community? Is it healthy for gamers? What does peer pressure even mean? Let's start with this.
I think it's a double-edged sword in the sense that there's some benefit to it in the sense of community having the power to pressure studios into correcting certain issues. And then there's also the fact that there's the pressure of the industry to follow suit when they realize something is working for them. And I mean that in the sense of
Like,
microtransactions and then just like further implementation of money. Like that's probably the base way to put it.
right. It did feel like growing up, a lot of games were passion projects as much as they were make money, because obviously you have to make money, it's a business. But they definitely felt like passion projects, and there were little hints between games. I remember even going back, we're talking very low technology, PS1 era, when Final Fantasy came out 7. They had what do they call it, Easter eggs in it for other games that weren't even released, and some games that had been released but were lesser known. And so you could tell that the people making these games put a lot of energy into their own idea of world building, and I won't say they had fun, because they probably didn't. I'm sure it was arduous, right? But there was a lot of love put into these things. And now, even titles we enjoy, a lot of them are very clearly just, here's the cookie cutter formula, make some money, let's go. So I see that point. Crystal?
Krista, you were mentioning that you felt that, like I had said earlier, that there's a benefit to it, but how do you perceive it as a benefit?
Specifically against AAA studios.
Let's
I
not
can think
become a
of.
AAA one day and have people be like,
I think there's two really good examples that happened recently. There was in Genshin Impact. They nerfed one of the characters, Nouvellette, who was the top DPS character. And the reason why he was top DPS is because there was a mechanic people were using that Genshin never meant to be a thing. And that's what they nerfed. So when everybody found out that they nerfed it, they went crazy. They basically got MiHoYo in trouble and all kinds of stuff. And so Hoyo not only fixed it, but ended up comping people to be like, sorry, okay, yeah, we get it. Like, you guys have power. My bad. And then Apex. You know this one, Joe. Apex tried to do a double battle pass in one season without people being able to use Apex coins, which has been a thing since, day zero, I think?
It's not only in Apex too, it's in most games where there is a battle pass system. If you buy into the battle pass, you can gain coins of some kind that if you save it up, you can essentially buy the next one for those coins and kind of
Yep.
keep recycling the system
yeah,
over and
Fortnite
over. Yeah,
does that
Fortnite's
too.
really
Yeah.
good at it. I think they have one of the better systems as far as being able to recycle back into it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Agreed.
it incentivizes you to finish the battle pass because if you finish the battle pass, you essentially can get the next one coming up.
Mm-hmm.
It also makes it a more friendly and somewhat less predatory. I say that with a major grain of salt for kids, because you could realistically go to your parents, or as a parent, you can invest whatever it is, 20, 10, 20 bucks, something like that, and not feel like, oh, my kid's on a subscription now where every month I got to give them 10, 20 bucks for this silly thing to like actually work. It is more like, if they have some self control, they can actually just carry it over and carry it over. and that's pretty good. Obviously, these companies rely on people not having good willpower. That's how they make money. So
Impulse
like,
control.
but it is cool that they have that option and that that's been the de facto. And I think this is what ties us back to the topic, which is this has been the industry standard. And it's ironically a very small aspect that is a very positive thing where if you spend money on something like that, the industry standard is you get rewarded for having self control and in a very predatory arena, if you will. And to Crystal's point, the community, one of the most popular games, Apex, tried to go, maybe we could just make more money, right? Like, yeah, 500 million isn't enough. We need 550 million, 600, 700. And so they introduced the idea of, well, we'll be the first to deviate and we're the big guys, right? So people are going to kind of just deal with it. And the community said, no, we are not, good sir.
It really hurt. It really hurt Apex. Like, I know I've been saying for a long time, the game seems like it's dying, but no, this one really hurt. Like, I keep seeing new videos pop up, and the most liked comments are the negative ones. So Apex doing this whole, I'm going to change it to a double battle pass per season. So now it'd be $20
Twice
per season.
No, it's double actually.
Well, it's $10 for the standard battle pass. So it'd be $20 for the season or $40 for the big one, right? But I forgot. I lost my.
So I think this gets into the double-edged sword nature. This is great for the consumer. It's great for the gaming industry. I think it's healthy to have a checks and balance because for sure there's been the gaming companies and the CEOs have absolutely had the upper hand for the past decade or more. Because if they didn't, we wouldn't be in this situation that every gamer that's been around for more than 10 years knows we had a steady decline into insanity in terms of how the gaming market works and how predatory it is and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. But it also makes it very dangerous for those companies that are trying to be avant-garde and try something new and imaginative and all this stuff because they have to be worried about, well, if the community doesn't like it, it's no longer, we just don't buy your game. Well, now it's, we take your reputation and you're never going to make a game again because no one's going to care about your game company as a whole.
The issue is that a lot of these companies aren't making changes just for the good, right? It would be different if they were like, hey guys, we're going to do a double battle pass this season. They're going to be $5 each. So that way it's still $10 per season like you were paying in the beginning. No, they were trying to make significantly more money off of it. Not only making it to where you couldn't use Apex coins, but you had to pay double. So like the ones that are getting bit in the butt aren't the ones that are coming up with new creative ideas. It's the ones who are coming up with new creative ideas for more money. And usually it's not even new and creative ideas. It's just, how can we make more money? How can we get more money from them? We don't care if they like what we have to offer. We just want more money.
I agree with you by and far, but I'm sure that there are examples out there that don't fit as squarely into that category. So recently we were talking about Helldivers. Yeah. And I had a fairly opinionated / negative opinion about how the Helldivers PR management, I don't know if it was their dev lead, whatever, someone or some people on their side were not as transparent as they could be about the fact that their game wasn't going to be supported with PlayStation accounts and that kind of thing. And the community, if you guys probably remember this, when Helldivers 2 came out, the community was raving about it. Mm-hmm. It was wildly popular. It was heard about everywhere in the gaming community and in a very positive way. Once they started having issues, the fan base like turned coated. You know, their eyes turned red, their fangs grew longer, and they dropped their signs of hooray and they picked up pitchforks and they were like, okay, where are we going now? So it changed pretty quick, and that aspect I think is dangerous. It
Well,
really
that
is.
whole situation was people not being able to play the game, wasn't it?
Yes,
Yeah,
but I was on the fence of it's their fault
yeah.
because I'm a very
Right.
contractual person. But a lot of people don't agree with me, didn't feel the same way I did. They still felt like these developers were really cool guys just trying to make a great game. And they probably are, so I'll give them that. So they were then in a situation where they could have gotten into serious trouble if the tides had turned a little bit differently, right? A
Mm.
lot of the negative focus went on to Sony.
Hmm.
They're the big bad company, right? And ironically, I felt like that was unwarranted. But it could have easily gone entirely on to the game developers in their studio.
Mm.
And I'd like to think about examples where this is not always positive for the gaming industry as a whole.
I'd like to touch on that and kind of play devil's advocate to both the examples that Crystal gave as far as Genshin and Apex.
Mm-hmm.
I'll start with Genshin. So I don't play it. I haven't played it in quite a bit. But from what I'm understanding from what you mentioned, it's that the character was released and people found a mechanic and they abused it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Effectively.
once the developers corrected it, the community had a fit about it and made them change it back.
Yes.
So it wasn't necessarily that the character was released with that ability. It just wound up being a loophole that was taken advantage of.
Mm-hmm.
And the developer tried to correct it, realizing it was like breaking the game essentially to them from their point of view.
The
Yeah.
And then the
balance.
community cranked their arm and said, no, give it back.
Mm-hmm.
So from a developer standpoint, like, is that necessarily fair?
I agree with you. I
Mm.
agree with both points of view because the opposite point of view that Crystal hasn't mentioned is that remember, this is a gotcha game.
Mm.
People are paying money for that character,
Because
right?
of what they're capable of doing.
Right. So some of the people, especially in China, it's very common. It's common all over the world, but notorious in China where they will spend thousands day of release.
On another point, with that specifically, there are many other characters that people do similar things on. So, like for instance, Klee, you can like clip animation or like break animation to where she just constantly shoots. That's not normal. But they never nerfed her because she never was top DPS. So it's just, it was a little weird.
That's why I said it's a bit of a devil's advocate's point on that. Because, again,
Yeah.
from a developer standpoint, if I'm making something and then there's an unintentional thing or whatever,
Mm.
that's kind of part of developing is that you can't, and we'll probably get to that in a little bit, you can't always plan for every single outcome. You can try to get pretty close and plan as best as you can, but there's always somebody or someone looking for like that one little like, how can I make this work different?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's necessarily like that's not really cheating, but that can be pretty unfair at times, especially if it's a PvP type thing. But if
Yeah.
it's not going against anybody else or in a ranked setting, it's kind of like, well, we didn't account for it. We can correct it a little bit, but you don't necessarily have to take it away. Now, to
Mm.
circle back to Apex and the argument of the double battle pass, I think they, from a developer standpoint, because when we were talking about it, it kind of dawned on me. A lot of the times, Apex has their season, but
Mm-hmm.
inside of their season, they have events. And then they have like the skin events and things like that, which can be pretty costly if you look at the overall price of it. So if they're
Yeah.
thinking, well, these people are paying this amount for this amount of content, what's different than giving them the same amount of content but splitting it at half and saying like, well, here instead of an event and the battle pass, you have two battle passes. But we're pretty sure that they're going to throw an event in the middle of that and triple and double it up. But
Mm-hmm.
again, I'm just trying to play the other side of the argument and say maybe they were just trying to put their content and then divvy it up instead of it being one battle pass and multiple like events.
I wish we had a bleeper because I'd be like, that's. Like,
I
But we don't
can.
have a bleeper, so.
I can
Okay,
bleep.
okay. My editor apparently is letting me know that if I let loose once in a while, it'll be all right. She'll catch it. That being said, I do want to. I do think that there is danger. I think it's healthy for now because, as Crystal asserted, usually and overwhelmingly so, when the industry, as the non-development side of the industry, the consumers pressure these companies, it is almost always a major known company, and it is almost always because they're doing something greedy.
Um, quite less hot topic, but also kind of a hot topic. We recently did something. We recently did
Yes.
something pretty cool. So we created our first prototype.
Yep.
I wanted to say it. I had to say it.
It's out there.
Mm-hmm.
So we made a mini game, for lack of a term,
Mm-hmm.
and it had a lot of lessons for us. It was part of our. The good news
Yeah.
is it. We made up a schedule, and we were like, we'd like to do a prototype once per month for the next 3 months. Month one is coming to an end right now. Today, as we record, is August 1st. Our goal was to finish our first small prototype by the end of July. Mission success. So, whip out the flags.
Woo!
So we'll be making another one, and we're open to feedback. So anyone listening or watching on YouTube, feel free to give us game ideas for a small prototype that we can make in a month. It has to be reasonable.
Very small.
You're like open world.
Yeah, open
150
world. Just start with that. Open world XYZ. It doesn't matter what else.
It has to be like a one level type thing. Very, very small. Because we're still very much learning, but we did learn a lot, and we had a lot of cool things to experience with this one. I just want to take the reins real quick on this one.
Do it.
I created little sprites, and for the first time ever, I got to see my art literally come to life. So that was very, very cool. Now, it could use some improvements. It's a little shaky, but I got it moving. My bird looks like it's sort of flapping its wings. Granted, might be a little hurt, but yeah. So that was really cool for me. That was my highlight experience of this whole thing. Now, also having to draw the same bird 50 times, not as fun.
Lessons were learned, which is why we're doing the prototypes.
Yes.
Some of them were hard lessons. Most of them were hard lessons. My lessons were real hard. I got in the code. I was like, pause menu, no problem. Pause. Oops, see, it works. No problem. Unpause. You said pause, right? No, I said unpause. You said pause, right? Work.
No.
So lots of little things to learn.
From a coding standpoint, Mav, I wanted to ask, like, what would you say is the single hardest part of like everything that you did inside of that prototype? You were just saying like the pause menu, but I'm pretty sure there was other things that were a little more complicated.
I'll say two examples. One is very generic. Generically speaking, working in an interface I'm not accustomed to. So the Godot engine is its own little universe, and I love it. It's really well made. It's very intuitive, but it is very different than what I use on a day-to-day basis. And having to context switch, I'd get off of my main job, take a break for an hour or two, and then I'd go to what we're doing. And it's very hard to context switch. You can imagine, even people that speak multiple languages fluently, it can be quite cumbersome to just switch context for most of us. So that was probably the number one consistent, not a huge deal, but very consistent issue I faced. I'd put a semicolon and, you don't do semicolons in this language. Or, I'd go to do like a search command from a shortcut I'm used to at work. And in the engine, it like closes my file. I was like, okay. So a lot of context switching. As far as coding, like specifically physics gets a little wonky. It requires you to really think differently. So it's not so much the code is hard. I've been coding for many years now. So for some people, the code part will be very hard, right? But for a seasoned coder, what's different and difficult about the code is you have to think like the game thinks, like the computer thinks, which you always have to do as a coder. But in the game, it's different because as a normal developer in a day-to-day job, whether you're a web developer, a software program, make stuff for banks, whatever. I know I'm boring. it's you never have to think about falling. You never have to think about collisions in your stuff unless that's what you already do, right? Outside of the gaming industry, there's very few things that you code that have physics and interact with each other. Or I remember coding something on our little prototype where I was like, oh, okay. So I want, when I walk into the tree, I want the character to not be able to go through the tree. So I made all this stuff to make a collision bubble, and it's fairly easy in Godot. So good job, Godot. But then my character walked right through the tree, and I'm just staring like, I don't understand. I put the code there. What's happening? And so they, in game development, they have this concept of layers, kind of like art has layers in Photoshop. So they have two sides of that coin. I'm getting a little technical. I'll be quick. Side one is what layer can you see as an entity? So my little tree can see the player, or the player can see the tree. But I forgot side two, which is what side do you exist on? Like you have to think about existence in physics. So it's not enough to say you can detect the player. You have to exist on the same plane as the player for the player to detect you, right?
Otherwise, you look like a ghost. Like,
right,
there's
like
something there.
I see you, but I don't care, like straight through. And so there was a lot of that. And while that's not actually difficult, it's difficult to start thinking like that when I'm not a game developer by trade, right? So mental shift is the biggest and most difficult thing to deal with on the coding side. It's just thinking like the game and thinking like a computer both.
I would have to say, because out of what I've had to learn is I've messed with sound before, and that's kind of what I'm doing as far as the game goes. It's learning that I'm so used to like, oh, you need an MP3 or you need this type of sound growing up that you're like, okay, there's like two types of songs or whatever, and you're
Just
fine.
get it into your
yeah, and then
iPad
you
or
think of
whatever.
a sound, and you have to really think of a sound in the sense of like you clap your hands, but you don't realize there's a speed to how you clap your hands, how you cup your hand, and then you have to account for the different types of sounds. So you can think you're doing the same thing, but when you really listen to it and have to put it into something, you're like, that's actually different. And then you have to look and like, what did I do different? And you're like, I hit it like this. But you're actually turning your hand, or you're hitting it instead of it being in the center of a drum, on the side of a drum. And sound becomes this whole other world that you really, really have to account for, even the start and end of something. Because I had given Mav a sound to put into the game, and I thought it was literally a 0.2 second sound of just a noise. And he's like, that was really long. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It was literally like a tree, I think a twig snapping. But I didn't account for the time that it took to just start it and end it. So I'm like, it's a twig snapping. What are you talking about? He's like, the start is too long. I'm like, it was so short that your brain doesn't even register it initially. But as you start to learn like what those sounds are, you learn to look for it. And that's kind of like what you were saying with code is you can look at one type of code and then you look at another and you're like, it's code, but it's not the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's the apples and oranges argument, but it happens in multiple different realms of this game, and it's crazy.
I would say that context switch affected you too, right? Because when you're normal, even on this podcast, we've become a little bit more aware of natural delay versus delay for consumption. So anyone listening to this podcast or watching it on YouTube, you're hearing it via consumption. But when we're speaking here, we're kind of just speaking, and our delays, the fact that I'm repeating certain words, it feels more natural because that's how people really talk and communicate. But when you're consuming sound, the bar is much higher than if you were talking to the same person or listening to the same person face to face. You wouldn't care. You probably wouldn't even notice. But when you're on YouTube and you can be like times 2 or skip, you notice.
What?
The same was true in the game. So let's say I had a little clap. I'll try not to be too loud. Right? Something like that. Very simple. Well, I want that to happen as soon as I tell the code to make it happen. So that time between my hands being apart and actually making the sound matters. Because if that delay is caked into the effect, well, now I have to code in a skip to 0.75 seconds of this audio. And doing that over and over for every sound clip is not, that's just too minutia to deal with. What about you, Crystal?
What about me? I started off with the art.
She's like,
No,
I said my piece.
So we were talking about what did we find difficult about things that we didn't predict about the prototype when it came to like game development, something we learned or experienced.
Angles.
Angles.
So remember when I created the little owl sprite, I created it from a side profile. And then I went to go make a different angle of said owl. And then I drew it from a top-down profile. So when I'm drawing on a piece of paper, to me, I'm very good at getting the angles that I want for whatever it is that I'm working with. But as soon as you put it on a computer screen, suddenly that's out the window. I can't even draw a simple cube. Like, I gotta go back to elementary school and learn how to do everything that I did on paper on the computer now. And I've actually heavily considered doing that, making the sphere and doing the shading and everything on it, just so I can get that experience back on a different medium. But all of the different angles that I've had to work with, and again, it's supposed to be something so simplistic because what we did was like a cartoon vibe to it. I think I must have sent you so many and you're like, this looks like the little tornado thing I sent you. This looks weird. It's not doing stuff right. And I'm like, what do you mean? There's nothing wrong with it. It looks fine. And then you were like, you should just get rid of this and that and that. And I was like, oh, I know what you have an issue with. And then I made the top of the tornado actually spin.
Weevils must wobble.
Yeah, originally I think you wanted me to like erase the line, so it spun but like disappeared and disappeared. So spin disappear type thing, which would have worked as well. But I was like, no, I have a vision. Like, this is my say.
I know we may have to split this podcast in two, and if we have to, so be it. But that brings up a topic I really wanted to cover with you guys, which was this prototype was our first opportunity to be on a deadline while also dealing with critical feedback. So each of us had critical feedback we received in some fashion. And it was our first opportunity to not only receive it, but be like, okay, there's a deadline. I can't just be like, whatever, dude. Like, we have to finish on time. And so an example that you kind of touched on was the perspective difference. I remember Crystal coming to me. She spent some time creating the back angle of the character. So what you see if the character's moving away from you. And it looked good, but I'm sitting here staring at it like there's something wrong with this. And I have to figure out what it is because I didn't immediately realize what I had an issue with. I just knew there's an issue. Something looks very wrong, but I got to figure it out because I have to tell her so we can fix it. And two, I have to be more productive than, it just looks wrong. It just looks wrong, okay?
I think that's how you started it with me, and I was like, what's wrong with it? Like, are you gonna...
Exactly. Like, what's wrong? Or do you just not like it? Like, and that's...
Is it his butt? Is that what it is?
That's the important part, not his butt. The important part is being able to vocalize what the issue is and understanding the difference between I don't like this or I do like this because that's me versus I don't like this because there's a functional problem.
I think that's where your job in particular is more difficult because Joe and I, we create the things and then we're like, here. And then you're like, here's some criticism about it, make it work. And we're, of course, like, what's wrong with it?
But it
Like,
sounds fine.
right. Like,
You said a smack, so I smack.
It works fine. My son screamed just fine.
yeah.
I mean, I had to time the hit right, but it made the sound. I didn't hurt anybody, just to be clear.
Yes, he did.
No. But no, like, I feel like on your end, having to be able to figure out what it is that isn't fitting the game is
Oh, I see what you're
difficult.
saying. You're saying like you guys get to interface with a human, which has the emotional aspects. I primarily interfaced with a computer being like, it is wrong. I'm like, yeah, but what's wrong? It is wrong. I'm like, work.
I still remember too when we originally were working on it, and I walked away from my desk, or you walked. No, it was you walked away from your desk. I'm really bad at storytelling. I'm sorry, but we were talking, and he's like, "Yeah, it's crazy because, if I make a mistake, it could crash my computer, and I don't want that." And I was like, "That sounds crazy." And he goes in his room, and you hear, "It did it! It made like 6,000 sticks."
Yes, I remember this. Yeah, I was very concerned about creating an infinite spawn of anything
Yeah.
because think about most video games. They spawn something. They spawn loot out of a loot chest, right? Something. In our case,
Minecraft, the
yes.
loot box thing.
Mhm.
So for us, we were spawning sticks from a tree. We'll talk about the prototype more later. Join our Patreon. Well, I was really concerned because I'm a professional developer. I have to avoid producing an infinite loop of sticks. So I was like, okay, I put some code in place to avoid an infinite loop. Well, my loop was finite. I just never gave it a finite limit. So it was like, okay, I won't do this more than every 3 seconds. You got it, boss. As opposed to once a frame, which could be like thousands in a second, or a couple seconds, whatever. And then I walked away to like clear my mind and talk to Crystal about, I'm really concerned about like making this infinite loop. And I didn't make an infinite loop. I just made one that never stops. There's a subtle difference. I know it sounds the same. And so I came back, and sure enough, on my screen, I thought my computer had crashed because I saw all these dots everywhere. Well, it was every stick that had been generated. It didn't fit. So they were like, okay, we don't fit. Let's get a little smaller and a little smaller. So I came back to like a pixelated screen, and I was like, what? And I moved the character. My whole computer was like, I moved an inch, and you could see all the little pixels disappear where I moved the character because he was picking them all up. And so I picked up like 20,000 sticks in a couple seconds, and this poor beast of a computer was like, I got it, boss. Just give me a minute. Well,
Yeah.
you're not going to keep moving, are you? And so I realized my mistake.
It was hilarious hearing it from the other room, though, because like I wish you could have been there for that, Joe. Hearing him just absolutely both be excited and panicked at the
It's a
same
eureka
time.
moment. You're just like, yeah.
Yes. Like I was right that I might mess up, and I did.
Like I predicted this.
Like this could be a problem,
Oh,
and now it
God.
is. So yeah,
It's like
We
that
have-
dog sitting in the fire, and it's like, this is fine.
I love that meme. It
Yeah.
is hands down my favorite meme ever. So, prototype was a lot of fun. We will announce when we get it somewhere that you guys can consume it. We're going to be making another one for August. We're very open to feedback on, single level ideas. So let us know if you guys have any ideas you'd like to see come to life. We'll keep you guys posted. This has been another Gaming at the Round Table brought to you by Owl Knights Media. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.